My name's Catherine. I'm one of the board members of WANBAM. So today we have Jessica Almy, who is the Director of Policy at the Good Food Institute, otherwise known as GFI, and is a public interest attorney. And we also have Claire Bomkamp, who is a senior scientist at GFI with the specialization of cultivated seafood. And so the organisation GFI works with scientists, investors and entrepreneurs to develop and promote clean meat and plant-based alternatives to animal products. Really exciting organisation, one that, I donate to myself. So I'm really excited to see you guys here and learn more. So today we've actually got Chloe Dempsey who's going to be interviewing. Chloe's actually just completed a master's at the Yenching Academy, graduating next week. So that's really exciting. And Chloe's thesis focused on the market for cultured meat in China. And Chloe's also a WANBAM mentee and was mentored by Jessica. So those two know each other really well already. So over to Chloe.
Thank you so much, Catherine. This has been a wonderful series so far, and I'm really glad that I could take part in it and get to fangirl over the wonderful guests that we have got today. It's so wonderful to have you here, Claire and Jessica. Thank you. I thought I'd kick off with something I think is a bit interesting. You're both working at the Good Food Institute, and I think probably most people know that the mission for the Good Food Institute is around using scientific policy and marketing innovation to improve our diet to the benefit of our own and the planet's health in a very broad term. But despite that commonality, you come from very different backgrounds, both in terms of your academic and work experience, and I believe that you have never actually met. So what was the prime motivation that brought you each to work at GFI? Perhaps we could start with yourself, Jessica.
Sure. So I've spent my career working for the public good, and I was working for another food policy organization when I heard our executive director, Bruce Friedrich, speak. I actually moderated a panel that he was on and was really impressed by the Good Food Institute's commitment to what I really see as four of the big issues facing our world today: world poverty, the alleviation of animal suffering, public health, and the environment and fighting climate change. But in addition to that, I was really moved by the theory of change that he articulated for the organization, which was not so much about convincing individual people to change their diets, but rather changing the system so that the choices that are available to people are by default environmentally friendly, humane, efficient. And for me, that really spoke to how I understand that people make decisions and seemed like a very smart approach to the problem. So I came to GFI 3 years ago. Prior to working for the food policy organization, I was in litigation. I am an attorney, studied at New York University School of Law. And prior to that, I worked for an animal protection organization, primarily focused on wildlife advocacy. So my background is quite different than Claire's. I have taken a teeny bit of science, enough to get me through my master's program, but nothing more than that. And it's really a delight to be working with people who are scientists and who have the technical expertise that Claire and her colleagues have, because we can really use law and policy to advance the best path forward for cultivated meat science, as well as other alternative proteins. So I think it's really fun to have such an interdisciplinary and diverse team at GFI.
Absolutely, and I guess that kind of approach to innovation and diversity is also reflected in the fact that you haven't met, in a sense, because GFI is across so many locations, and yes, something I'd love to revisit later. And Claire, what about yourself? What was the prime motivation that brought you to work at GFI?
Yeah, so for me, I'm definitely much newer to this space than Jessica is. So prior to GFI, I was in grad school. I initially started thinking like, oh, I'm going to do the academic thing, become a PI eventually. Learned that that was not what I wanted to do. And I was kind of, just, well, okay, I'll finish this thing. And kind of within the last year that I was in school, I learned about cultivated meat and learned that this was something people were seriously doing. And at first it was kind of, I was thinking about it from the perspective of, as a consumer, like, oh, I'm really excited for when this stuff is going to make it into the grocery store. I'm looking forward to that. And then eventually I realized, like, oh, I do sell culture. I should probably be like trying to make that happen. And in terms of, you know, working for GFI versus working for one of these other companies, I definitely considered that. But this was the first, you know, kind of thing that really felt like a good fit. And I would echo what Jessica said about the theory of change being something that really spoke to me as well. So the idea that we're not trying to change things by shaming anyone. We're, you know, really working to make the whole system better and, you know, make food that's genuinely more delicious and gives you more choices as a consumer, and also has all of these sort of, you know, reducing these negative external consequences that that we're all really concerned about. And so for me, I think the motivation, at least at the very beginning, was primarily the climate impacts of meat production. And as I've kind of learned a little bit more, an area I've gotten more interested in is the food security aspect of things. Not in really any formal academic sense, but just in terms of, you know, the things that are really driving me to feel like this is important. And of course, you know, there's, you know, 10 reasons why it's important, which I think is, you know, just speaks to, you know, this is something that can make literally so many problems just less of a problem.
Yeah, I think like having only dabbled in this area, whenever I talk to people about this, there's always an angle that you can approach it with, because it does touch on so many issues. So it's great to hear both of you mention that in talking about your motivation. I think that you've partially answered this, but do you consider your work at GFI to be part of a sort of broader mission that your career is contributing to? And if so, what motivated you to form that mission? Was it a deliberate or conscious choice, or did it just kind of seem to happen? I think you've both partially answered this, but I also would love to hear your actual response to it. Jessica, I'm going to pick on you again first.
Yeah, I do think this is part of a broader mission for my life. I think, you know, I look at the people in my life, and I think people have usually a primary motivation. I know folks who their primary motivation is to be free, you know, just to live their lives in freedom. I know other people who really want to connect with other people. And for me, I think it's really this deep motivation to do good. And I think that brings us a little bit to the whole kind of umbrella under which we're talking today, which is effective altruism. You know, I think what's important to me is to do the most good I can with the resources that I have available. And that's a way that GFI is a particularly good match. So one of the things I asked Bruce after the panel where I interviewed him was, you know, do you ever think about effective altruism? And he said, yes, that's exactly, like, that's what motivates the decisions that we make at GFI. You know, we look at the neglectedness of the cause. We look at the impact that we're going to have. We look at if others are doing it. And we use those factors to decide what we're going to be working on. And it's true, you know, when we work on one thing, it is necessarily to the exclusion of another. So it's really important to think through what the counterfactual is. Like, if we're not working on a particular issue, so one example is we work on label censorship. So that's basically legislative and policy efforts to ensure that producers of plant-based and cultivated meat products can label their foods using everyday words that consumers understand. And that is often in reference to meat or other kinds of animal products. Now, what the food is clear to consumers. You know, no one sells soy milk and calls it milk, or a veggie burger and calls it a hamburger, but they do reference these animal product terms. And the incumbent industry has been fighting against that and wanting to ban those terms. And so we've mounted a really big legislative effort across about half of the United States, the American states, to oppose that. We've brought lawsuits, and I continuously are asking ourselves, if we weren't doing this, who else might be doing it? What would the impact, what would the outcome be? And how else could we use those resources? So I think that continuous sort of self-reflection fits really well with my personal predisposition, which is to do as much as I can to, you know, improve the the happiness and reduce the suffering of others with the time that I'm given on this planet.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jessica. And Claire, for yourself?
Yeah, so for me, I think the honest answer to this is I'm still figuring that out. I'm very new to this space, and I think right now it's pretty clear to me that this is one of the best things I could be doing with my time. I don't know if that'll be true in 5 or 10 years. It's something I definitely could see myself doing long term, but I think it would be a little bit overconfident to say, like, yes, this is the one thing I'm going to do with my life. Like, maybe it'll be something else. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that through this mentorship program, it's been great to connect with Jessica and some of the other mentees and talk about like how much is career about like, oh, and you have a mission, and then, these exact steps happen, and how much it's the case. It's like, oh, well, it seems like a good thing to do, and I'm enjoying it at the moment. So it's great to have the kind of contrast in your two perspectives there.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. I kind of add on to that, I haven't always worked at the most effective organizations. And, that was a conscious choice to build career capital and to like ready myself for what comes next. So I think, my career definitely has taken twists and turns, and I hadn't heard of Cultivated Meat 10 years ago, so there's no way I would have known that this is what I would be doing. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and she is constantly kind of thinking about what she'll do in her life. And I think, probably it's something that we don't even know about yet, because the world is continuously changing and you're responding to the opportunities that you have before you. So I think it is certainly a journey.
Absolutely. And how cool if you were a teenager and your mom was like working on censorship labeling for like alternative protein. And yeah, I think as Catherine had flagged, I did my master's research looking at attitudes to cultured meat. So obviously I'm a big fan of all the work that you guys do at GFI, and I have been following you for quite a while. But given that you both come from such different backgrounds and do really interesting but completely different things, I would love to get an elevator pitch of the most exciting work project that you're currently working on in a way that everyone could understand. So obviously we're all kind of like alternative protein junkies in a sense, but yeah, would you be able to describe that in an elevator pitch and why that project is important or impactful? And Jessica, I'll start with you.
Oh, I get to go again. Yeah, I think, well, I've already told you about one area of work that I do find exciting and interesting, but I think the one that I will pitch you on right now is the need for open access research. So right now, the government is pouring tons and tons of money into making conventional agriculture more efficient. But what it ought to be doing instead is taking a portion of that fund and putting it toward accelerating progress in alternative proteins. Alternative proteins are a more efficient way of making protein for human consumption. They don't have the same externalities as conventional agriculture, and they're going to diversify the food supply so that it's more resilient to these kinds of pandemics that we're seeing now, but also crop diseases, droughts, a number of different pressures that we see on the food supply. So we have this opportunity right now, particularly in this moment in time, where we're rebuilding a lot of our economy and pouring money into revitalizing the economy, particularly in the United States, but in many other countries as well. And we have a choice. Do we want to keep doing things the way we've always done them and make them a little bit better? Or do we want to really create protein looking to new ways of doing it, looking at creating meat directly from plants by drawing from things that exist in the plant kingdom or directly from the cells of animals outside the bodies of cells? And I think the answer is resoundingly yes. This is an incredible opportunity for the United States and other countries to really move progress forward in alternative proteins in a way that when we look back on it, will have been foundational to the future of food that we will create.
That was so motivational. I want to like cheer and be like, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're an elected official watching this, please champion open access research and your funding decisions.
I am doing some work at the moment with somebody who is heavily involved in livestock, and they recently came across alternative protein, and they're like, it's so exciting. It really could change the way we think about agriculture. And I'm like, yeah, And I wish I could just play them what you just said, Jessica. That was fantastic. And what about for yourself, Claire?
Yeah, so for me, I think the most exciting one to talk about right now is something we're just about to release. So the project is basically putting together an atlas of data and information and resources related to specific seafood species. So we're calling it Pisces, which is an acronym. GFI is really big on acronyms, if you haven't picked up on that. So this is Phylogenetic Index of Seafood Characteristics. It's a little bit tortured, but we're happy about it. And so this is basically just supposed to be, it's certainly not there now. I don't want to talk it up too much, but the goal eventually is for this to be kind of like the one-stop resource for like, okay, well, what are the characteristics of conventionally produced salmon or tuna? What are the molecules that are, present in a piece of fish from one of these species that make it taste and smell the particular way that it does? What do the cells look like if you, under a microscope, what's kind of the distribution of muscle cells, fat cells, things like that. What papers have been published, kind of having a nice guide to that, that sort of thing. And then my colleague Jen is also contributing to the resource through things like greenhouse gas emissions or prices of different species, because those are going to be kind of really important factors that companies or even investors are going to be looking at when they're thinking, okay, well, how do I prioritize species? What are the things that are going to be the most impactful to be able to replace in the short term? And so we're kind of putting finishing touches on version 0.1 of that. And that should be out. I don't want to give a date on it, but in the relatively near future.
I knew about this project, but I did not know it was called Pisces. That is so cool, Claire.
That's a very recent development, just in the last week or two.
And the open access research work is called GOAT, for GFI, Open Access Research Task Force. So we do like our acronyms.
I love it. And if somebody who's like, oh, wow, I still don't understand alternative protein takes anything away, it's like, GFI's got a great acronym, and you should get involved with their work because you're going to love Pisces. That is fantastic that one of you spoke about open access research, and then the other was talking about, research. And I think that for somebody who is, just finished some research, I definitely relied on GFI resources and think that it is so fantastic that they are producing so much, which just means that somebody who comes along and has an interest or wants to potentially start a business or something like that has got so much support. And yeah, it's wonderful to see. I'm conscious that, yes, I have been choosing Jessica each time first. So Claire, let's move to you, and I'd love to know a bit more about GFI itself. And I'm sorry for the hardball question to start with, but what do you think is the most challenging aspect of working at GFI?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest challenge is just that there's so much that we don't know. So we're really at this stage where, a ton of different companies have produced products, but they're these really sort of small scale, a couple bites of something at a really high price. So we really don't know too much about what is production of cultivated meat going to look like 10 years down the road. What particular type of cell are people going to be using as their starting material? Is it going to be an embryonic stem cell? Or is it going to be something more like an adult stem cell? And that's going to have some really big implications for kind of what does the process look like by which these products are made. So it's really hard to kind of nail down one factor when everything else is still unknown. And even apart from just the science, there are a lot of questions around kind of the regulatory aspects of this. So what are the FDA and or the USDA going to say about what processes and techniques you can use in creating these products? And then that kind of influences the decisions that the companies are going to make around this kind of genetic modification would be really useful, but am I going to be allowed to use it? And should I put time and resources into it? So this whole field kind of suffers from that challenge of, trying to solve a lot of problems at the same time. It's also something that, makes it really exciting and really cool. And also a really cool area to be a new person who's just transitioning from a different field and deciding that this is what you want to do. It's like, well, yeah, I'm new to this, but everyone kind of is new to this. So that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. And what about from your perspective, Jessica, not being as new?
Oh, but still new. 3 years is nothing. No, what Claire said is that she totally nailed it. Like that, it's a much better answer than what I would have come up with off the top of my head. But it's absolutely right. Like we are working in just totally new territory. Everything we work on is brand new. So Claire touched on the regulatory path to market for cultivated meat, which is so important. We now understand the broad outlines of what that looks like in the United States and Europe and a couple other places, but you know, it's also what makes it exciting. Regulators are actually working with GFI and working with the companies themselves to figure out, you know, what kinds of safety tests they're going to require, what that dossier of those tests would look like in order to demonstrate that the products are going to be safe. Because what everybody wants, the industry, GFI, the governments, is that the first products that come to market are safe for consumers, that everybody has a good experience with the product, and there's not unnecessary red tape to get there. So, you know, it's, I think from a policy perspective, one of the challenges is that that there are interests that don't want this to come to market at all and are going to try to erect barriers. So just like incumbent industry is, you know, trying to restrict the labeling of veggie burgers on one hand and almond milk, you know, there's also folks who are lobbying actively to try to make this process as onerous or confusing or duplicative across agencies as possible in order to slow down progress. And so, you know, we look at an organization like GFI, our US policy team is 8 to 10 people. You know, we've got a few policy folks in each of our international affiliates, but it's a handful of policy folks working on these issues versus, you know, what we call the barnyard here in Washington, D.C., which is, you know, the incumbent industrial animal ag industry, which is incredibly powerful, which is, you know, gets politicians elected in this country. Their opinion matters very, very much. What makes it better and what gives me hope is that we look at the big companies that we would traditionally think of as meat companies, you know, Cargill and Tyson and Smithfield and JBS, and all of these companies are diversifying their portfolios and they're really rebranding themselves as protein companies. So when they back plant-based meat or cultivated meat or a combination of different ventures, then that removes one of those hurdles. And I think that's why ultimately we will prevail. Both consumers want it, and it's a lower impact, more efficient way of making meat. But most importantly, you know, it's going to be good business too, and we're going to have you know, allies on our side who just want to produce more meat, no matter how they make it. And so that does give me hope. And Claire's right, it's super exciting to be working at the kind of the edge of policy, and I imagine the edge of science as well, really creating what comes next.
I absolutely find it so exciting, and I think that at first I was like, oh, maybe it's just, you know, when I first heard about the area of alternative protein, I was like, maybe it's because it's really new to me, but like over time that hasn't abated at all. And I could absolutely talk about this all day, and I hope maybe later in the conversation we can return to a few more actual, you know, sort of discussions around the thematics within alternative protein. But I thought that I would sort of change the direction of the conversation a little bit now. And obviously today, you know, we're hosted by WANBAM, and I've been, as Catherine had mentioned, been a part of their mentorship program with you, Jessica, as my mentor, and that's been a really fantastic process. And I found that I've personally, enjoyed it and have benefited from it. And it's been great to be connected to other mentees as well. And the segue is I'd love to hear, how do you feel about diversity in the space that you work in? And what do you think are effective tools to combat lack of diversity? And Claire, I'll return to you.
So I think answering the question for kind of biology generally and, you know, biomedical sciences, and I don't really see much reason to think that alternative proteins are particularly different in this respect, is if you think about gender on just sort of a superficial level, like, yay, there are women here, like, it's great. when it comes to race, maybe not quite as diverse. I think where the problem is you know, the idea of the leaky pipeline, things like that, where it's like, oh, well, we have a lot of, you know, biology grad students, and like, yay, we did it. And it's like, well, no, not really, because, you know, those people are not necessarily having the best experiences in their labs, or, you know, dealing with, I'd say, a variety of different kind of factors that are saying like, well, you don't really belong here. And a lot of people are dropping out because they're like, I don't want to deal with this. I've had friends who, like, you know, had some of the not the greatest experiences with advisors and various other experiences within academia. And so I think there's a lot that we can do there. And it certainly, you know, depends on the lab you're in and the culture of the particular program. Some places are great. Some places, you know, have their issues. And I think that there's a lot that we could do. So what's been really exciting recently within GFI is seeing, you know, people start to think more about how we can leverage the fact that this is such a new field, and it's really still in the process of figuring out what it is in terms of, you know, academic research into alt protein, like what is the culture of this group, and that's still you know, very much in flux and open to being changed. And so one of my colleagues at GFI, Amy Wang, has been, you know, doing a really good job of bringing up those issues and getting us to think about like what can we actually take action on to make this better.
Fantastic. And Jessica is someone who, yeah, independently raised this issue yourself. What's your perspective on it?
Yeah, well, I'm on the leadership team at the Good Food Institute, and I know that, you know, we've been doing quite a bit of soul searching recently. I think combination of current events and, you know, watching the incredible police brutality, particularly targeted at Black men and women, has been really jarring, and I think has caused us to look at ourselves pretty hard. And, you know, my conclusion, and I think probably this is what GFI itself, if the organization had a point of view, would say, is we haven't done enough to make GFI diverse and as inclusive as we could. And so I think we could stand to do better. We are, you know, we are a pretty incredible group of people, but we're disproportionately white. And I think that our perspective is lacking because we don't have the diversity of the world reflected in our, you know, especially the composition of GFI USA. So you know, GFI, we love acronyms. So next week is actually our PER week. Stands for, Claire, you might need to help me on this, like purge, restore, refresh.
Reorganize?
Something. Yeah, something. The idea is basically to go into deep work and to like clear out your space and think about the things you don't have time to think about. And I know that I'm going to be spending a lot of next week thinking about how we can be more inclusive at GFI and what we can do to create a culture that is really welcoming to more diverse team, what we can be doing to really step up our efforts in this way, and what I personally can be doing it with my team at GFI, because I think it's really easy to point the finger at sort of the whole culture or the whole movement, or you know, however we're classifying ourselves. Or like, I have a law background, which has a lot of the same problems that Claire was talking about with, you know, lots of women graduating law school and then attrition because of various factors. But the most important thing from where I sit is to do some soul searching and really see what I and we as an organization can do better, because I think we would be stronger if we were more diverse and more inclusive. So I'm glad to have that opportunity to think about those things deeply. And I'm glad that you asked the question, Chloe.
Well, thank you for such a thoughtful answer, Jessica. And I think that, yes, I mean, all of those issues and your perspective, I completely agree with. And I think that we can definitely benefit from greater diversity, whether that's like in EA or within, you know, individual organizations. And I think that like at a different kind of level, but also related, coming from having like looked at the potential for all of this and alternative protein in China, there's like very much a danger that we will step into an area that is similar to like attitudes towards GMO, and how like that's seen as a very like, okay, well, the West came in and decided that we should use this food technology, which they weren't going to use themselves. And like, there's a very like sort of racial, neo-colonial kind of perspective on that, I think it's, you know, obviously GFI all over the world. As I said last night, listened to a wonderful GFI India webinar with like 3 guests who were women. But it's important that we consider these things, because it will play into the success of the movement more broadly, I think, as well. And yeah, so wonderful to have WANBAM to start with that, and other groups within EA. I'm conscious that there are people who have been asking questions in the background, and they seem to touch a lot on the actual work that you're doing at GFI and GFI's mission more broadly. Before we dive into those, I do have a couple last kind of generic questions, but ones that I always find they're often interesting answers to. And I'll just ask one of them. So I wanted to ask, are there any like resources that you're a fan of or that heavily influenced your career direction that you would like to share? Jessica, you spoke about Peter Singer and The Life You Can Save. But yeah, I don't know if there's any others that you would like to add to that list. I'll return to you first, Jessica, and then Claire, if you've got any, that would be great.
That's a great question. I'm always learning. You know, I've always got more podcasts and books, but probably what's been most influential in my career are the people that I've known, and particularly those who have gone ahead of me and have made time to provide advice to me. One really good piece of advice I got early in my career is about when, you know, things get difficult or stressful, and you have an opportunity either to go deeper into the problem and really engage on it, or to like run the other direction screaming for help. And this person said, you know, always choose to go deeper into the problem, to always take on that challenge. And I think that's been really good advice for me. We were talking a little bit before the audience joined us about imposter syndrome, and I think it's so easy for so many of us to think that we're not the right person to do a particular thing, or that, you know, we're in the company of people who are, you know, smarter or more accomplished or whatever than we are. And I think just having a willingness to jump right in and to work on really hard things has benefited me in my career, and I'm really grateful for that piece of advice.
I'm sure we're all very grateful that you took that advice, Jessica. So thank you. That's great. Claire, did you want to add something here?
Yeah, in terms of resources, one thing that was really helpful for me when I was kind of starting to get into this was Alex Shirazi's podcast. I think it's officially the Cultured Meat and Future Food Show, something along those lines. But that was, you know, something I was sort of passively, as I was kind of finishing up grad school, that was something where I was just kind of absorbing information from and really getting to know, like what's the deal with this field. And I found, like, when I started at GFI, I barely knew anyone in alternative protein. And so that was a really good way to kind of start to understand, you know, the landscape. And since Jessica brought up imposter syndrome, I guess my thoughts on that would be that, you know, don't fight imposter syndrome too hard. Like, my perspective is that, you know, in some ways imposter syndrome is humility. And so what I personally found helpful was not to convince myself that I'm not an imposter, but just to realize that, you know, the person who I'm talking to, who I really respect, is also an imposter a little bit. And the people you really have to watch out for are the ones who don't have imposter syndrome. I had to work with someone like that once, and it was scary. So I think, I don't know, that's the perspective that works for me. And I think obviously if it's, you know, ruining your life, then that's that's something to maybe kind of try to find a way of fighting. But I think that that sort of imbalance in, you know, the people who have some level of humility are the ones who get kind of pushed down because they're not, you know, clawing their way up to the top. That's really the problem. The problem is not the fact that, you know, you personally recognize that you have limitations, because of course you have limitations.
I love it. That's a new perspective on imposter syndrome I hadn't heard before, Claire. And thank you for sharing. And also, yeah, I'm a long-time listener of that podcast. And I think there's more and more exciting podcasts that are getting started in this area, which is fantastic to see that there's so many people who are really passionate about the mission, I guess, the mission that GFI has, and, you know, like more broadly in this sector. There has been a heap of questions which are very much related to what GFI does and what you do in this Google document where people have been adding questions. I might ask a few of these, and then potentially we could open up, because, you know, we're a relatively small group and some people might want to ask questions personally themselves. I think that some of the questions on the Google Doc we could find answers to on the GFI website itself. So I don't want to ask questions where there's information out there already, when you can do, if you do a good Google, you'll find the answer already. But there's some really great questions as well. So one of them is many EAs are very optimistic about cultured and plant-based meat. Sometimes it sounds that animal agriculture is all but solved by you good people. But the numbers of animal farms in the world keep going up, so I'm more pessimistic. How optimistic are you, and do you think we need a lot more people to concentrate on this issue in order to succeed? Jessica, I see you nodding your head, so we'll go to you first. What's your perspective on this question?
Yeah, we are not close to winning yet. I don't think this has been decided at all. You know, I do think that there is, the technology holds a lot of promise, really technologies. I think, you know, both plant-based and cultivated meat have the promise of being cheaper than conventional meat, and ultimately tastier because there's more you can control. But they have to be cheaper, or at the same price or cheaper, and as tasty or tastier than conventional meat for this to change. And right now, there are only probably a few products on the market that we would say come close to being as tasty as animal meat, so much that they would appeal to omnivores and flexitarians and folks who just want to try new things. And so I think there's a lot of room a long ways to go. And that's, I think, why I'm so really all in on getting more research, because fundamentally, if you look at the products that are on the market right now, they're pretty much burgers and nuggets. There are a couple other exceptions, but there is not they're not the whole array of animal meats that people like to eat, not all of the species that people like to eat. Claire has been talking about seafood, and I think that's particularly relevant there. We have nothing that looks like a swordfish steak or a tuna steak, or, you know, or anything that folks who are really passionate about seafood eat on a regular basis. And so there's a tremendous opportunity, and I do think that it depends on the resources that are put into this problem. I think this problem is big enough that it deserves substantial investments by governments, by corporations, and by philanthropists. I think that all of them working together, it's very likely that this is an outcome, but it's certainly, I don't think, a sure one. And that's why it's so important that we work on it. And so important that we work on it now, too. You know, I think there's an old proverb about the best time to have planted a tree was 20 years ago. Next best time is now. Like, that's how I feel about this technology. We really, all of the research that we need, particularly open access, where all the new companies can build on it, and it's the same kind of foundation for everyone. We really need to already have it, but we don't. So we might as well start building it now. So yeah, I think we need a lot more resources poured into this problem. I am optimistic that technology could fix it. I don't think it's certain that it will without a lot of energy, effort, and money.
That was fantastic answer. And Claire, what do you think? How optimistic are you?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I'm also optimistic that this is going to go somewhere good. But we also have to keep in mind, like, demand for meat is going up, and it's going to keep going up for several decades at least. And so if you're talking about something with, something that's just as big as the market for meat, like, of course alternative proteins haven't made a dent in it yet. Like, we keep hearing this narrative that plant-based burgers are exploding right now. They're exploding relative to where they were a few years ago, but in terms of the overall market, it's still tiny. So we're just, I think we're really at the beginning of seeing what I hope will be a massive shift. But we're certainly not anywhere near the point where it's going to be like, oh, well, we're actually producing less animal meat because of these products. Like, that doesn't mean it's not a promising technology. It just means that we're like very, very early years.
Absolutely. And the webinar that I was listening to last night, Varun from GFI India said that previously GFI was focusing very much on tissue engineering, or on cell tissue engineering, and also on, sort of like plant-based meat, but that they were looking more into, that you guys were looking more into fermentation, and, I think increasingly even just like the scientific or the technological answers to these questions are expanding as well. I have just one specific question in relation to this, because this person has asked about like the number of animals farmed in the world keep going up. Something that I feel hasn't had very much focus, but I think is interesting to big meat companies like Jessica, you were talking earlier about how JBS and Tyson and all of these are rebranding themselves as protein companies. And I think those companies are actually quite interested in hybrid products that combine meat and plant-based products. What do you think about hybrid products? I know this is very specific, but if you have a perspective, I'd love to hear it, because I think that it's something that is potentially going to be embraced more by incumbent industry. And I think that for us who are like aligned with the mission of organizations like GFI, we tend to ignore it because it doesn't, obviously it's not the perfect answer. So I'm curious, what are your perspectives if you have one?
I'm totally all in on that. I think let's put mushrooms in the burgers. Let's do a hybrid of cultivated meat and plant-based meat, or conventional meat and a little bit of cultivated. I mean, I think it, like Claire said, right now we're at like less than 1% of the meat market. So, there are a lot of solutions that need to come into play. And I think getting consumers comfortable with plant-based and cultivation, and I think also fermentation, which you touch on, Chloe, is really important. So, I don't know that that's where everybody wants to end up at 2050, but certainly I think that that's got to be part of the solution for getting us there. I'm really excited when I see companies have blended products and offer them on the market. I mean, because this whole thing is not about vegetarians and vegans, right? It's about meat eaters, and it's about giving them things that are delicious, that are as good as what they're used to or better, and making it really easy to choose things that have a lighter environmental footprint and are more efficient.
Absolutely. Claire, do you have a perspective on this? I suspect you may.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you can make a product that's delicious with less impact, like, why wouldn't you? And we're still figuring out the technology with both cultivated in terms of the ability to scale up, and plant-based in terms of the ability to make it taste like meat. Like, there are challenges there, yeah. So let's think about these intermediate solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is something that I find quite refreshing about, I guess, like GFI, both, your perspectives and an EA perspective, like, that's very consequentialist when we think about this, and like, okay, well, how can we have impact even if it's marginal at first and it's going in the right direction? There's been, as I said, a number of other questions. I might just ask one more, which is there a way to reduce the price of cultivated meat to appeal to a broader market? I think the answer is obviously yes, that's quite scientific, but they've also asked, how useful is it for animal advocates to campaign for welfare improvements that increase the prices of conventional meat? Jessica, again, the nod is making me send the question to you first.
So many opinions. We'll let Claire answer the technical question, but as to the policy question, I think it is important for animal welfare activists to improve the lives of animals. I think not only will it raise costs, which will make it easier for these products to compete, but it also internalizes externalities, which is really important, and I think is a good policy justification for those reforms. And maybe most importantly, it improves the lives of the animals who are being used in the interim. So obviously the overall welfare improves. I think that's a, except for the most strident activists, I think that's a goal that we can all get behind. Where I hesitate is that I don't know how effective a lot of animal welfare efforts have been to date. I think that there have been significant improvements in very limited areas, but at least in the United States, which is the policy arena I'm most familiar with, we've been really handcuffed by the fact that the Animal Welfare Act excludes livestock and poultry, just doesn't touch any common farming practices. State cruelty laws will not, be applied against what is common animal husbandry, and almost everything that happens on a farm falls under that umbrella. So there are a lot of really incredible and amazing and smart people working in animal welfare, and they're not having the kind of impact that they really should. And I think it's because the playing field is ultimately, it's not level. It's meant to benefit agribusiness and not to protect the individual welfare of animals, or really to even reflect what public values are around this. One interesting thing is that nearly half of Americans believe that we should ban slaughterhouses. So Americans care about animals on farms. They don't want to even see them die. And yet all of these things continue to happen because they're just so baked into the system we have. So I guess if someone were looking for career advice, what I'd say is if you can find a way to work with to work on the issues that are most tractable and to work with the people who are having the most success, then I would definitely encourage folks to work on animal welfare issues. I think, it's one of the most important moral issues that we're facing right now. But if, like me, earlier in my career, you find yourself in an organization and you can count on one hand the number of animals whose lives you've impacted over the course of a year or two, then there are better ways to spend your career. And I would really encourage folks to look for those. And I think alternative proteins are definitely that better way for those folks.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for finishing on a kind of motivational and career-related note there. Claire, what's your perspective on this?
So on the animal side, I agree with everything that Jessica just said. And one thing it made me think of is there's a really great talk, I think it was a TED Talk by Maisie Gansler from BAMCO, where she talks about kind of her experiences with trying to get her company to be able to source more ethically raised bacon. And it's a journey, and like all of these things that just, oh, well, we want to do this and we're willing to pay more. And it's like, oh no, that's not even an option. So I'd recommend that talk. And then on the question about the cost of cultivated meat, I think today the biggest thing is the cost of cell culture media, particularly the growth factors that you have to add in order to get the cells to grow. That's a massive contributor to the expense. I think if we can bring that down, it'll bring the total price down significantly. Once we get there, there are still going to be a bunch of other challenges that then have to be addressed, but that would be sort of number one on the list.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Claire. And as I said before, I would absolutely recommend the GFI website and resources to anybody who's interested in the answers to the questions that are in the Google Doc. Thank you both so much for taking the time to talk with me and share your insights on the area that you're working in and on your own sort of like personal and career directions. It's been really fantastic, and I'm sure that the audience would agree. And I'm also conscious of time, and thank you as well, obviously, to WANBAM for hosting this and for giving me the opportunity to take part in the mentorship network. Mentorship program, I really found it such a rewarding experience. And yeah, I'm very grateful. So thank you both Catherines for that as well. I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thanks so much, Jessica and Claire, for sharing your wisdom on this extremely important issue.